Most people imagine transformation arrives like a thunderstorm, loud, unmistakable, electric with signs you cannot ignore. They expect the moment of change to feel like a revelation crashing through the ceiling of their ordinary life. Some burst of certainty, some rush of inspiration that makes everything crystal clear all at once. They wait for the fire. They wait for the momentum. They wait for the unmistakable feeling that yes, this is it. This is the shift I have been searching for. But what if the shift does not announce itself that way at all? What if the most profound transformation you will ever move through begins not with a roar, but with a silence so deep and so strange that your mind mistakes it for emptiness? Here is what almost no one talks about. A quantum shift rarely feels the way you expect it to. In fact, the early stages of the most life-altering changes a human being can experience tend to feel uncomfortable, disorienting, and oddly quiet. Not the quiet of a life that has gone still, the quiet of a life that is reorganizing itself from the inside out. Something begins happening beneath the surface long before anything changes in the world you can see. The thoughts that used to pull you into spirals begin losing their grip. The situations that once woke you up at 3 in the morning with a racing heart begin feeling strangely distant. The goals, the fears, the relationships, the patterns that once had your nervous system completely wrapped around them begin feeling less central, less urgent, less like the whole story of who you are. And that is the part that confuses people most, because the mind is trained to measure progress through intensity, through visible movement, through the undeniable feeling that something is happening. If something matters, the old version of you learned to feel it strongly, loudly. The body learned that emotional charge equals meaning. So when that charge begins fading, when the internal noise begins quieting down, the mind reaches for its first available explanation. Something must be wrong. You must be losing your fire. You must be falling apart. You must be moving backward instead of forward. But what if the opposite is true? What if that strange quieting, that sense of emotional neutrality, that feeling of being suspended somewhere between who you were and who you are becoming, what if that is actually the first signal that something is going deeply, profoundly right? This is one of the most important things you can understand about real transformation. Your internal world changes before your external world catches up. The emotional chemistry that once organized your identity begins shifting. The nervous system begins stepping out of its old survival loops. The body starts producing less of the old chemicals, the ones tied to stress, to urgency, to the constant low hum of fear that most people have simply mistaken for normal life. And once that chemistry begins to change, perception changes with it. You start seeing differently, not dramatically at first, just differently enough to notice. The same situations no longer trigger the same automatic reactions. The same fears no longer feel quite as solid. The internal voice that spent years narrating your limitations begins losing some of its authority. That is not stagnation. That is the beginning of something enormous. The researcher and author Dr. Joe Dispenza has spent years exploring the relationship between the body, the mind, and the field of reality that surrounds us. One of the core ideas at the heart of his work is this: when the body is no longer functioning as the keeper of the old mind, the internal architecture of your identity begins to dissolve. The emotional patterns that once defined you start loosening. The nervous system begins calibrating to something new, and that process almost always begins with a phase that feels strangely quiet, strangely neutral, strangely undefined. It is not a breakdown, it is a recalibration. Think about it from a quantum perspective for a moment. If reality is not fixed, if the universe operates as a field of infinite possibilities rather than a single predetermined path, then what determines which version of reality you experience? The observer, you, the state from which you are perceiving, interpreting, and emotionally responding to the world around you. The old observer was generating reality from a specific internal state, built from memory, from past wounds, from the accumulated emotional residue of 1,000 repeated patterns. That observer kept collapsing the same possibilities out of the quantum field because it was anchored to the same internal frequency. But what happens when the observer starts to change? There is a transitional phase, a gap between the old pattern losing coherence and the new new one stabilizing into something you can recognize as solid. That gap does not feel like power. It does not feel like a rival. It feels like you are standing in an open field between two worlds, and neither one of them is fully real yet. That is not a crisis. That is transition. And the sooner you understand what transition actually feels like, the less you will panic when you find yourself inside it. The in-between is real. The in-between is necessary, and the in-between is where the shift is doing its most invisible, most essential work. Because the old self is not simply replaced overnight, it dissolves gradually. The emotional charge fades, the identity grip loosens, the nervous system stops firing the same old distress signals with the same old intensity. And for a period, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, sometimes longer, you exist in a kind of quiet that feels almost too clean, too undefined, too open. The old mind calls it confusion. But what it actually is the beginning of something your body has never fully experienced before. Coherence. Coherence is not excitement. It is not urgency. It is not the feeling of chasing something desperately. It is internal alignment, the mind and the body and the identity moving in the same direction, without the constant internal argument that used to drain so much of your energy before you even walked out the door in the morning. The silence is not absence. It is the very first form of that coherence beginning to take shape. So if you are in a phase right now where things feel strangely quiet, where the old fears have lost some of their force, where the old goals feel less magnetic, where the life you have built feels somehow less emotionally convincing than it used to, do not run. Do not assume something has gone wrong. Sit with it, because something extraordinary might be going very, very right. And here is what makes that even more significant. This quiet you are experiencing is not random. It is not a glitch. It is not a sign that you have lost your connection to purpose or to life. It is the first moment where your internal system begins trusting a reality that does not yet have external proof. A reality that exists right now as frequency before it exists as form. And once that trust begins, once the body starts learning to exist in the unknown without immediately reaching back to recreate the past, that is when the real shift begins to move. Most people spend their entire lives in reaction. Stress arrives and the body responds. Fear lands and the nervous system floods. Uncertainty appears and the mind races to resolve it as quickly as possible. That entire cycle, the anticipation, the reaction, the recovery, the anticipation again, becomes so deeply embedded that it stops feeling like a pattern and starts feeling like the natural texture of being alive. But it is not the natural texture of being alive. It is a learned one, and like everything that was learned, it can be unlearned. Not through force and not through willpower alone, but through the gradual, steady process of allowing the nervous system to discover that a different way of being is possible, that peace is not a threat, that stillness is not emptiness, that the unknown does not have to mean danger. That discovery is what this quiet phase is actually about. Your system is not shutting down. It is waking up to something it never fully had access to before. And the only way to protect that process is to stop interpreting it as a problem that needs to be solved. Let the quiet be quiet. Let the neutrality be neutral. Let the in-between be exactly what it is, a necessary passage between the life that no longer fully fits and the one that is being built right now in the invisible architecture of your shifting internal world. Let's go deeper, because understanding that the shift begins quietly is one thing. Understanding what actually happens inside that quiet, why it feels the way it does, and what it is actually doing is what separates the people who move through transformation and the people who retreat from it. Here is one of the most overlooked truths about the human mind. The brain is not simply observing your life, it is predicting it. Every experience you have ever had, every emotional pattern you have ever rehearsed, every fear you have carried, and every wound you have returned to, all of that becomes raw material for a predictive system that runs almost entirely beneath the level of conscious awareness. The brain takes the past and uses it to generate expectations about the future, and those expectations do not sit quietly in the background. They shape perception, they filter reality, they tell the nervous system what to anticipate before anything has actually happened. If stress was the recurring theme of your past environments, your brain prepares you for stress the moment you enter anything remotely similar. If emotional pain followed certain kinds of situations, the body begins bracing for that pain before the situation even fully unfolds. Over time, those predictions stop feeling like predictions. They start feeling like facts. They stop being something you observe and start being something you simply are. This is how identity forms, not just through thought, but through repeated emotional experience, through the daily rehearsal of the same internal chemistry. You do not just have a life. You have a particular way of experiencing life that has been refined and reinforced over years of repetition, and that way of experiencing life becomes so deeply familiar that it starts to feel like reality itself. Now here is where it gets fascinating. During a genuine quantum shift, that predictive system begins breaking down. The old emotional signals stop carrying the same weight. The familiar loops start losing their grip. The nervous system begins stepping out of the chemistry it once mistook for identity. And as that chemistry withdraws, something happens that most people are completely unprepared for. The old life stops feeling emotionally real, not invisible, not gone. Still present in every external sense. The same circumstances, the same people, the same physical environment. But something about it all begins to feel different. Things that once triggered urgency begin feeling strangely optional. Goals that once felt central begin feeling like they belonged to a different person. Fears that once organized your entire nervous system begin looking almost theatrical, like scripts you once believed completely but can now only half believe. This is not numbness. This is not detachment in the destructive sense of the word. This is something far more precise and far more significant. What is fading is not your capacity to feel. What is fading is your emotional investment in the old version of who you are. And that distinction changes everything. The old life felt solid because you kept feeding it with attention, with reaction, with the repeated willingness to organize your energy around the same narratives, the same story about who you are, the same story about what you always go through, the same emotional charge given to the same patterns day after day, year after year. You were not just living inside a certain reality, you were actively reinforcing it, and that reinforcement was what made it feel so undeniably real. But when your internal frequency begins shifting, that reinforcement starts withdrawing. Certain goals lose their magnetic pull not because they were bad goals, but because they were connected to a self that is no longer fully operational. Certain relationships begin feeling strangely distant, not because you have become cold, but because the emotional agreement between your old self and that dynamic is weakening. Old fears begin losing their authority, not because the circumstances have changed, but because the observer generating those fears is beginning to change first. The emotional realism of the old timeline is fading, and when emotional realism fades, the old world loses one of the most powerful anchors keeping it in place. Because reality, from a quantum perspective, is not only maintained by external circumstances, it is maintained by the observer who keeps returning to it emotionally. The old world was not just happening to you, it was being continuously reinforced by the way you observed it, reacted to it, gave it meaning, and returned to it with the same internal chemistry. That is why this stage can feel so surreal. You look at something that once defined you and feel oddly distant from it. You sit inside a familiar situation and notice that your body is simply not entering the same old state. The old mind tries to explain why you should care the way you used to care, and yet something inside you stays quiet. Something inside you remains strangely still. That stillness is not absence. That is the beginning of a timeline separation, because here is what becomes possible when emotional realism starts withdrawing from the old. The new begins feeling more real, not all at once. In flashes at first, a moment of unexpected clarity, a desire that feels cleaner than any desire you have felt in years, a quiet certainty that something more aligned with who you actually are is closer than it has ever been, a sense, subtle but undeniable, that the future you have been trying to force is actually trying to find you. Those flashes matter. Those flashes are not wishful thinking. They are early signals of the emerging self. They show you where your energy is beginning to move. They reveal the shape of something that is not yet fully visible, but is already becoming more emotionally true than the life you have been living. And then comes the threshold, because right at this point, right when the old life is losing its emotional grip, and the new one is beginning to feel possible, there is a pull, a deep, powerful, unconscious pull backward. The body begins whispering, sometimes screaming, that it needs the old chemistry back. Not because the old chemistry served you, but because it is known, because it is practiced. Because after years of rehearsing urgency and stress and intensity and longing, those states have become the body's definition of what it means to be alive. This is one of the most critical moments in any transformation, and most people do not even recognize it for what it is. The mind begins searching for reasons to overthink again. Old emotional patterns resurface with surprising force. Old stories about who you are and what you deserve start finding ways back into your attention. The familiar discomfort begins feeling almost comfortable compared to the open, undefined quiet of the new. And here is the honest truth of it. The body would often rather return to familiar pain than remain in unfamiliar peace. Chaos can feel safer than calm if chaos is what your nervous system spent years preparing for. Urgency can feel more alive than coherence if urgency is what your identity has spent years mistaking for purpose. This is not weakness. This is not a sign that you are not ready. This is the nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Seek familiarity, protect the known, return to what has been rehearsed most deeply. Understanding this changes the way you move through the threshold. Because once you recognize the pull for what it is, not truth, but memorized emotional preference, you stop giving it the power to pull you all the way back. You hear the old voice without obeying it. You feel the old sensation without becoming it. You let the discomfort be present without using it as proof that the new is wrong and the old was right. Each time you do that, each time you refuse to rebuild the old emotional architecture just because it whispers your name, the new self gets stronger. Each time you let the silence stay silence instead of turning it into panic, the nervous system learns something it has never fully learned before, that the unknown can be trusted. That peace is not a warning sign. That coherence is not emptiness. The shift is not protected by force. It is protected by refusal. Refusal to give the old mind the emotional fuel it needs to reconstruct the old world around you. And that refusal is not passive. It is one of the most powerful choices a human being can make. Because every time you make it, every time you hold the line between the old chemistry and the new coherence, you are doing something at the level of the nervous system that no amount of positive thinking alone can achieve. You are training the body to exist in a new state. You are teaching the system that it does not need the old fuel to survive. You are building, one quiet decision at a time, the internal architecture of an entirely different life. That is what this phase is actually about. Not waiting, not hoping, not simply enduring the discomfort until something changes from the outside. Actively, deliberately, repeatedly choosing not to go back, choosing to stay with the strange, the quiet, the undefined, the coherent, even when everything familiar is calling you home to the old version of yourself. That choosing is the shift, and the more you practice it, the more undeniable the next phase becomes. Now we arrive at the part that changes everything, the part that most people are actually waiting for, even if they do not quite have the words for it yet. Because after the quiet, after the disorientation, after the strange in-between and the pull of the old chemistry and the temptation to retreat to the familiar, something begins to shift in a way that is undeniable. The new reality starts feeling emotionally real, not conceptually interesting, not theoretically possible, emotionally real, in the body, in the nervous system, in the felt sense of who you are and what belongs to you and what kind of future actually fits the person you are becoming. This is the turning point, not when something changes dramatically in the external world, not when the evidence arrives in a form the logical mind can accept. The turning point is internal. It is the moment when the new self stops being an idea you are hoping to reach and starts being the emotional center of gravity your life begins organizing itself around. For most of your life, the old self had something extraordinarily powerful on its side: emotional realism, Its fears felt convincing because the body kept producing the chemistry of fear. Its limitations felt true because the nervous system kept generating the signals that confirmed them. Its patterns felt inevitable because every time you returned to them, you reinforced the neural pathways that made them feel like the only available version of reality. The old world was not just something you lived inside. It was something you kept choosing at the level of the body 10,000 times a day. But once the quantum shift moves far enough forward, that emotional realism begins transferring. The old life stops feeling like home, and the new one, the one that has not yet fully arrived in physical form, starts feeling more natural, more aligned, more like the actual truth of who you are than anything from the past ever did. This does not happen the way movies suggest. It does not arrive as a single dramatic moment where everything becomes clear all at once. It arrives in fragments, a thought that comes through quieter and cleaner than the old ones, a decision that costs none of the usual internal argument, a boundary that rises from a place of clarity instead of fear, a morning where you wake up and notice, without even trying, that the old version of your life simply does not feel like yours anymore. These moments are not small. These moments are everything, because they reveal that the new self is not just visiting, it is moving in. And once the new self starts moving in, once coherence starts becoming your baseline instead of your exception, the quantum field around you begins responding in ways that can feel almost startling. What used to require enormous effort starts feeling lighter. What used to feel impossibly far away starts feeling appropriate to where you now are. The opportunities, the connections, the circumstances that match who you are becoming start arriving with less friction, not because the universe is being manipulated, because the observer is no longer in conflict with what it is trying to create. This is what people mean when they talk about manifestation becoming effortless. It is not magic in the way most people imagine it. It is alignment. It is the natural result of a nervous system that has stopped spending its energy defending the old world and started allowing the new one to stabilize. The old observer kept collapsing the same range of possibilities because it was anchored to the same internal state. The new observer, the one being built through every choice you make to stay with coherence instead of retreating to chaos, begins collapsing a different range. Not because it is forcing a different outcome, because it is finally inhabiting a frequency that makes different outcomes possible. Think about what that means. Think about how much of your life has been shaped not by what was actually available to you, but by the emotional state through which you perceived what was available. The old frequency was a filter. It narrowed reality down to what fit the old self's expectations. What it expected to struggle with, it struggled with. What it expected to lose, it lost. What it expected to remain out of reach stayed just out of reach, not because life was conspiring against you, but because the observer you were operating through was continuously confirming the same range of possibilities. Now that observer is changing. And as it changes, the filter changes. And as the filter changes, what becomes visible changes. What feels available changes. What feels real changes. That is not a metaphor. That is the mechanism. And here is what makes this final phase both beautiful and demanding at the same time. It requires consistency, not perfection, not the absence of doubt, not a guarantee that the old thoughts will never return. Consistency, the repeated choice, made daily, made in quiet moments, made especially in the moments when the old self gets loudest, to return to coherence, to return to the person you are becoming instead of the person you used to be. The old self was built through repetition. It became powerful because you came back to it again and again. The same thoughts, the same reactions, the same emotional bargains made with fear. Over years of repetition, those patterns became identity, and identity, as you now understand, becomes the lens through which reality is filtered. The same law applies to the new self. Coherence becomes identity when you return to it consistently. Calm becomes home when you practice it enough times that the nervous system stops interpreting it as threat. The version version of you that no longer needs the old chemistry to feel alive becomes the dominant observer, the one your life organizes itself around. When you make that version real through daily, deliberate, unwavering return, that is the final act of this transformation. Not a single heroic moment of change, 1,000 small moments of loyalty to what is becoming true. Because here is what no one tells you about the last phase before a shift fully stabilizes. The old mind often gets loudest right before it loses. Not because you are failing, because the old identity can feel that it is losing ground. It knows at some level that its grip is weakening, and so it pulls out everything it has. The familiar doubts, the old stories, the deeply rehearsed fears, the voice that says this is too good to be true, this is not really you, go back to what you know. That loudness is not evidence that the shift is false. It is evidence that the shift is real. It is the last resistance of a self that is finally, truly losing its hold over you. Do not mistake the volume of the old voice for the weight of the truth. The new reality does not shout. It steadies. It deepens. It becomes more emotionally undeniable the more consistently you choose to stay with it. Stay with it. Because the moment you stop feeding the old world, the moment you stop giving your emotional energy to the thoughts, the stories, the reactions that once kept the old timeline running, the new one can finally stabilize without interference. The life that belongs to the person you are becoming can finally take shape without the old self tearing it down before it can stand. This is the quantum rebirth, not a dramatic single event, a gradual, deliberate, deeply personal process of refusing to keep collapsing the old world and learning to trust the field of what is becoming real. The old thoughts may speak, let them. The old sensations may rise, feel them without becoming them. The old world may offer you the old role one more time. Decline it, not with anger, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knows they have already moved on. You are not the same observer you were when this process began, and because you are not the same observer, you cannot keep generating the same reality, not if you stay loyal to what is becoming more true with every passing day. If the inner world has been feeling strange lately, quiet in ways you do not quite understand, distant from things that used to matter, suspended between something ending and something not yet fully arrived, trust that feeling. It is not emptiness. It is the quantum field reorganizing itself around a new version of you. Do not hand your future back to a self that is already losing coherence. Do not call the in-between failure just because it does not feel like arrival yet. Do not let the old voice convince you that because it is still present, it is still true. Something is shifting. Something is becoming more real, and you are closer to the new life than the noise of the old one would have you believe. If this message found you at exactly the right moment, if something in these words landed somewhere deeper than logic, then this is your sign. Subscribe to this channel right now so you never miss a transmission made for exactly this stage of your awakening. Leave a comment below and tell us, what is the old thought that has been getting loudest lately? Name it, because naming it is the first step to releasing it. And share this video with someone who is in the in-between right now, someone who needs to hear that what they are experiencing is not the end of something. It is the beginning of everything. The new reality is forming. Stay with what is becoming true and let the old version of you finally fully step aside.